Welcome to the uncharted territories of Paranormal M, where the stories we share will leave you questioning everything. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated with our latest mind-bending narratives. Am I haunted? Or is my house haunted? Or can this be explained? After going to college and moving back in with my mom for the summer, I've noticed that some things in my house are off. My family moved to the Woodlands, Texas, around 2009 when I was 8. We bought this house from a family of 4, and they were the only previous owners. Growing up here, I can only think of 2 main occurrences that were scary or just off-putting. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and feel that there was something else in the room with me. Another time, my brothers and I were playing our spin-off of hide-and-go-seek, where one person would hide and leave a clue as to where they were hiding. The other 2 would go around looking for the clue and then them. In this case, my brother was the one hiding, and I was the one looking for him. I found a stuffed animal on the door of our walk-in attic. The door was open and the chain at the top was undone. Whenever I had walked in, something with a deep voice started growling at me, so I ran out and slammed the door. I yelled to who I thought was my brother that I knew it was him and to come out. To preface, this attic was a hangout area that we had fixed up to where there were no actual storage things in it. We would go in there all the time, and we had never had issues with animals getting in there. I called for my older brother to investigate, and he didn't hear a growl when he walked in, and then we found my other brother hiding in the toy room that was down the hallway. Flash forward to the present. My boyfriend has been in town with me, and we were moving my old yearbooks into the attic. I looked inside, and there wasn't enough room in there, so I closed the door and put the chain on it. Ever since I was growled at by something in that attic, I have always remembered to put the chain on that door. That night I woke up in sweats from a bad dream where someone was living in the basement of my old house, and my room was extremely hot. I woke my boyfriend up and we decided to go into my brother's old room, which was significantly cooler. But when we turned on the light, the chain was off the door to the attic. We both looked at each other and were like, yeah, no. So we turned around and went back to my room. Later that night, I had another nightmare that people were trying to murder my friends and I. Today we were talking to my mom about what happened, and she said that she thinks there's a friendly ghost. She said that our dog, on different occasions, has stared up to something on the staircase. This staircase leads up to both my room and my brother's. She also said that my other brother's lights to his room are just on sometimes when she knows she didn't turn them on. Nothing scary has happened to her, which is good. I feel that if there is some entity in our house, it only lurks upstairs. I also think, though, what if it's me that something is attached to? One time I was asleep at my college house, and I woke up at exactly 3 a.m. I looked at my phone to check the time and thought, weird. And a moment or 2 after I set it down, a picture frame on my wall fell and shattered on the ground. I was freaked out and then cleaned it up and went back to sleep. On another occasion, I was laying in my bed and I heard a rustling underneath. I looked underneath it, and a black cat dashed across my room. I was freaked out, but since it was cold outside, I let it stay in my room for the night. It was extremely timid and wouldn't let me near it. One of my roommates had accidentally left her front door open 3 or 4 days. This was prior to this happening. But in no way did I think a cat would have walked into our house and then camped out underneath my bed. None of us had seen it at all in the house throughout that timeline, nor had we seen it prior around the area. The next day I had to call animal control to get it out because it started growling at me, and once she released it, we continued to see it around her back lot and driveway until we moved out, January or June. I don't know if this was coincidentally superstitious or just a cat seeking refuge. I do feel safe, and these things that have happened could be explained by some logical reason, but I feel it all lines up a little too nicely, especially the deal I've got with the attic. Ask Reddit. The house my parents currently live in, and the house that we lived in before they moved. The spirit or spirits in the house we all lived in never felt malevolent, more mischievous. It would do silly things like move stuff, turn on lights, turn off the microwave. We did see something once in the hallway. My mom and I had seen my dad go that direction, so naturally we assumed the shadowy movement that we saw was him. When my mom called over to remind him to shut the light back off, he called from a bedroom far away from the hallway, and the light wasn't on. Another time, right after my son was born, I heard it. He was about 2 months old and very colicky, and my mom would hear us sometimes and get up to check on me. I fell asleep, kinda, after he finally fell asleep one night, with him on my chest in the recliner. I heard someone walk across the carpet towards us. I asked who I thought was probably my mom if we woke her up and half opened my eyes to nothing in front of me. Both things were kinda creepy, and I was definitely a little... Well, there's an emoji here. I will try to interpret this emoji. It is a face with... It's a face showing teeth. I forget the name of this particular emoji. However, the text reads as follows. I will repeat. Both things were kind of creepy, and I was definitely a little afterwards, but never felt scared there. Their new house is kind of the same, but you can tell it's not the same spirit. I don't know how to explain it. We've seen them multiple times, full-figured and very clearly. There's a younger woman in 1900s clothing with lighter-colored hair and a kind face. The other spirit is a boy about 8, also in 1900s clothing with darker hair and a saddened face. Neither of them have ever spoken, but usually you can hear them walking around faintly. The first time it was me, my mom and dad, they were all out, and all 3 of the grandsons were playing outside. I went to come out of the bathroom and I saw a boy in the hallway out of the corner of my eye. I went to turn and yell at him to go back outside, but he was gone. I ran up to the front of the house and called out to the kids who were all 3 clear across the yard and couldn't have possibly been inside. The second and third times were both my dad. His first encounter was about 2 days after mine. I hadn't said anything to anyone, so he couldn't have possibly described the same boy unless he'd seen him. He was waking up and rolled over to the woman and the boy standing next to his bed. When he went to wipe his eyes, they disappeared. He thought it was my son, possibly my son and I, but we weren't in the house. The second time it was only the woman, and she was walking across the house. They don't do much either outside of close and open doors and steal my mom's left shoes. We did investigate, but couldn't find anything about the property, and the house was built in the 70s, so the clothing doesn't fit the house. Help needed with crystal ball. I don't believe in magic, but a few times in my life I've seen things I can't explain, And I've come to believe it's not so much about what you believe, it's how hard you believe it. Indiana Jones. Anywho, back in the 70s and 80s, my grandfather did a lot of work in auction houses, in and around Central Florida. You name it, he had a hand in it, from importing Rubik's Cubes to ballpoint pens. One of the auctions he attended was in Sarasota, when the Ringling Brothers and the Barnum Bailey was clearing out a warehouse. So as a kid, there was definitely some fun stuff around in my grandparents' house. More often than not, I'd spend hours just digging through stuff. Towards the end, the house was reminiscent of hoarders in part of their failing health. Anyhow, I remember going through a drawer with my grandmother, and I pulled out a glass crystal ball. Yeah, like the ones you'd see a fortune teller use in a tent. I thought it looked cool, and my grandmother instantly snatched it away and put it back. She said that it wasn't to be handled. Odd, right? Curious, I later asked my grandfather about it, and he got uncomfortable and told me that he'd bought it from the Ringling Brothers and the Barnum Bailey at one of their auctions, and that it had in fact been used by their resident fortune teller, Lady Zindra, Rose Adelstein Lewiston. Cut to some years later. My grandmother had advanced Alzheimer's, and my grandfather passed away unexpectedly. In short, the aftermath was a complete shit show, and a story, better or not, told another time. But in the chaos, I was able to take a few items from the house. One of which was said crystal ball. Why? My aunt is a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad person, and I didn't want somebody potentially dangerous to end up with their hands on it. As a teen, my aunt played with a Ouija board, and I'm told that the experience not only scared her, but dramatically changed her as a person, in the wake of how malicious she had become. So why talk about some stupid crystal ball? Well, I believe it's got some seriously bad juju, and I don't really know what to do with it now. Like it belongs in the Warrens Occult Museum or some shit. I don't think it's hyperbole. I've kept it wrapped up in a rag and in a drawer since 2012 because it gives me the willies. And I swear, every fucking time I handle this crystal ball, all hell breaks loose around me. And for a while, I thought it was all in my head. But now I'm not so sure, and it's really freaking me out, and I don't know what to do. I've talked to a few people in the past, including a psychic friend, Paula, that does professional readings, who had told me I should try to cleanse the crystal ball under the light of a full moon. And Mike Burton, a lifelong family friend, Vietnam veteran, and retired sheriff. He's an expert on the occult, who trained under the real Ed and Lorraine Warren, and has investigated over 2,000 paranormal cases, and even assisted in real exorcisms. Mike is afraid of the crystal ball, and he's told me to protect it, but not to get rid of it or destroy it due to what's held inside. Whatever evil spirit or entity that might be. As such, I haven't physically brought the crystal ball to him since he declined to handle it. For additional context, this is a man who refuses to host his own reality show for Sci-Fi Channel because they wanted him to fake findings like ghost hunters for dramatic effect. But what the fuck do I do with this thing? I was cleaning about a month ago and took it out of its drawer. Stupid me, I unwrapped it from the rag and handled it and put it into a velvet-like bag with drawstrings, so that I don't have to worry about it ever being exposed on accident. I then put it in a bin and took it to my storage unit, and I swear the shit in my life has been hitting the fucking fan ever since, and other people in my household have been seeing dark shadows for the past month, often described as a fox or cat-like blurs. which have happened every other time that I've ever handled the damn thing. What's worse and really freaky is that nobody else knows that I'd been handed this crystal ball but me. But everyone sees the same things afterwards. It's like a spirit or manifestation or some crazy shit like that I can't explain in any rational way that's being collectively and independently experienced. I'm afraid to leave it out on a full moon to cleanse, like was suggested, as I don't want to leave it unattended and fear that it'd have the opposite effect, thus supercharging as opposed to neutralizing. I've thought about contacting the Wriggling Brothers and Barnum Bailey to donate it back to them in their museum, but all I have is the story of where it came from and no proof or paper trail, so I doubt they'd even be interested. And again, I fear that it'd end up in the wrong hands, with or without a disclaimer. I can't get a renowned paranormal or occult investigator who I know to help. I'm literally stuck, and the longer I have it, the more I feel I inherited a century-old problem with no clear solution available to me. I have this weird nightmare, and I know something is wrong. All my life, I've had paranormal encounters, especially between the ages of 10 and 13. And even though these have decreased since I moved from my old house, it should be noted that they never blessed it, for which we believe that it's the reason for everything that's happened. The story that I'm about to tell here today is more than anything to ask for help and find a name or reason. Well, this started about 2 years ago. I was very stressed since it was time for exams and grades, so I slept little. On one of these nights, I remember that in the middle of the night, I got up to go use the bathroom as usual. However, when I left, I saw a black shadow in front of me, to which my first instinct was to hit him, but my surprise was to see that the shadow had disappeared, and the only thing that remained was a strange and heavy feeling in my hand. Clearly I was scared, but as it's something common, so to speak, I decided to go to sleep. In my dreams, I usually know that I'm dreaming. That is to say, I have lucid dreams. But I cannot control what happens in these. Having said that, I remember I was dreaming about something very silly. The truth, I would meet my favorite artist, and I would tell him that I liked him, and suddenly his girlfriend would arrive and begin to tell me that he was very sorry, but it was her boyfriend, to which I then realized that I was dreaming, and I made the mistake of telling the people inside my dream, quote unquote, "It doesn't matter anyway, I know I'm dreaming." And from then on, my dream turned gray and people started attacking me as if to get me out of my dream, and they succeeded. After that, many of my dreams were so, however, I didn't really know what was going on to become worse. Days passed after having those nightmares until one night, I began to dream of the same black shadow that I initially found. It would go to the roof of my room to see me, and I asked it to please leave me. I knew that I was dreaming, but I didn't want to tell him because I knew what was going to happen if I tried to scream to get up, because no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't wake up until one of those screams. I got up and saw the black shadow on my roof. It went away in seconds, but from there, everything got worse. I started having dreams that, as I already mentioned, I knew they were dreams, and then at some point, they become nightmares so real that I want to get up, but I can't. When I think I've already gotten up, I give note that I could never get up, and I'm still inside my dream. This becomes a loop for which it happens to me from 3 to 5 dreams until I get up to continue sleeping, and then all of this is repeated yet again. It should be noted that all of these dreams are nightmares, too scary and sometimes even real. I've been living this for 2 years, and every time I tell somebody they can't find an explanation, or they confuse it with sleep paralysis. I hope somebody can help me. Ask Reddit. I don't think this person falls under any of these supernatural categories. However, I really need to tell this story to somebody because I can't help but think about it from time to time. I ran errands with my mother a few years ago, and there was this woman who kept looking at my mother and smiling at her. However, my mom didn't notice her while I did. I didn't think much about it. I thought it might just be a work colleague, so I didn't say anything. My mom often meets relatives or her work colleagues as we live in a small town. However, at some point, the woman approached us and hugged my mother, complimented her and all that. The woman was really kind and told us that she'd been living here for about 3 years. However, I have literally never seen her before, neither has my mother. Here comes the strange part. The woman told us where she lives, apparently near my grandparents' house, which is really weird because we would have seen her if she really lived there, but okay. My mom once wanted to stop by the woman's house, however, it turned out that nobody lives there at the address that she gave us. It's been a few years now, and we've never seen her again, which is so strange. It's as if the woman has never existed. I'm so glad that I was with my mom that day because otherwise, I would have never believed her. I really wonder what happened to that woman. I mean, she told us that she's been living here since about 3 years, and if she had any plans of moving, she probably would have told us. The Weirman. This happened to me and my then roommate a few years ago, somewhere like September, October 2019. We were just chilling on the couch and listening to the rain outside, when at one point we started talking about how the rain sounded like the sea, and how we pictured a lighthouse on a windy shore. I know this sounds like we were high or tripping, but we were absolutely not. We were completely sober. Slowly but surely, the conversation between my friend and I started to shift to visualization, or perhaps a hypnosis. It's unclear to me how this normal conversation about a lighthouse turned into the shared vision or dream that it did. But at one point, we were both there, in the lighthouse. We both saw a man there, dressed in a yellow raincoat. He had a weathered face and a gray beard, but his most remarkable feature were his eyes, or actually the lack thereof. In the place where his eyes were supposed to be, there were 2 black holes, as if they had been kind of gouged out, and only some rotting black skin remained. We both felt this intense urge to get out, so we ran away from the lighthouse to the woods as he followed us. I'm not sure about how we woke up from this hypnosis, dream, vision, whatever it was, but I remember realizing that this was bad and we needed to wake up. So I urged my roommate to do so. After I returned to my body, I gently woke them up and we discussed what happened. They were completely freaked out, as was I, and I was grateful I woke them up. We both caught our breaths, and then we had finally processed what happened. We checked the time. When we had entered this state, it was around 12 midnight, but when we woke up, it was about 3 a.m., yet it felt like we'd only been doing this for about 15 minutes. The next day, we both separately drew the man that we saw. We were both illustration students at the time, and without having discussed what he looked like. We drew the exact same man, had both colored the space around him black, and had also given him the exact same name, the Weirman. I think a shadow person revealed its true form to me. I've always had sleep paralysis from a kid and always saw shadow people. Anyway, for a few years now, it all stopped, and I felt that phase was gone. But something happened recently. I started having sleep paralysis again, but this time was different. I was half paralyzed. I could move, but very weak. I started getting a visitor whenever I'm in this state. Unlike the ones in the past, this one wasn't humanoid. It was always shaped like an animal, a dog maybe, I don't know. I would feel it climb onto my bed. So anyway, I decided that since I can actually talk a bit in this state, even if it was weak and I slurred, I would ask it when next I see it what it wants from me. Fast forward to a few days later, it came again. I felt it climb onto my bed as usual, so I proceeded to ask it what it wanted. It was as if this entity stepped out from a shadow and approached me. Our faces were almost touching as it stared into my face. Its face was like a mix of a person and a robot, but super creepy with large owly eyes. It didn't talk to me anyway, just stared at me for a long time. I dragged my bedsheet and covered my face when I couldn't bear it anymore, but I knew it was still there. I weakly peeped a few times, and it stood there just staring. It eventually vanished after a long time. I think my husband was visited by a fairy. Tonight, my husband took our dogs out for an evening walk in our yard. We live on 2 acres of wooded land in the country. After a few minutes, he came inside and tried to explain to me what he saw. He stated that something large and glowing flew in front of him, stopped, then flew back off into the woods behind our home. He swore it looked like a human with wings. We looked up moths and tried to debunk it and found nothing that looked anywhere near similar. We went back outside to see if we could see anything else. While outside, it reminded us that we have a couple of security cameras pointed in our backyard. We ran upstairs and had chills watching the video back. First thing we noticed, one of our dogs suddenly stopped with his tail pointed and was staring into the woods. A second later, you see something fly, basically flutter in my husband's direction from the same place. It was large enough to be seen on a camera a good distance away. Unfortunately, it wasn't visible on our other camera. I was too shocked to record the footage, but plan to first thing tomorrow, and I can share that here. But what does this mean? Why did it show itself to him? Is there something that he should do? ETA footage. So I uploaded the whole thing so you can see how my dog's acting. My husband didn't say a word, and her dog was not even looking in his direction. You can see my husband's shadow in the bottom right as he's heading back to the patio. I didn't upload the camera that showed my husband's reaction as he didn't want to be shown, and you couldn't even see the figure in that camera. Around 21:58:44 is when it first appears in the right corner near the third tree from the right, and then flies towards my husband. Also, I trust what my husband saw. He said it was a fairy, and I believe him 100%. It was larger than any flying bugs that we've ever had around here, glowing green in color. Not a moth, and definitely not a lightning bug, as he was able to see its body, rounded head, and wings. Also, no drugs or alcohol were involved, in case anybody was wondering. I wasn't posting to make anyone believe what he saw, just looking for advice from others who've had more knowledge to make sure our home, animals, and children are safe. Ask Reddit. First was the most recent, give or take, 2009, 2010. The house I lived in was definitely haunted. I would hear knocking above my bedroom coming from the attic. Every time I went to check, nothing there. And it wasn't as if it was something banging against the ceiling on a windy day, because it happened on absolutely mild days also. It was always 3 distinct knocks, similar to ones that you would see in movies. I kind of talked myself into not believing it to be paranormal, until my mate, his girl, and their toddler were sleeping in the room next to mine. I woke up the next morning to find them sleeping in the living room. Apparently, something had tried to attack the child at night. So yeah, shit was haunted. I lived in the UK at the time, so go figure. Second is something that's been told to me multiple times, but I remember vaguely because I was like 5. I was in Pakistan, in the back of a truck and a van. The back door of the van or truck was broken, so it wouldn't stay locked. This is an important part of the story. So I remember falling asleep in my aunt's lap. I remember closing my eyes and being in the back of that van and truck. When I woke up, her and I were sitting in the exact same position, in the middle of a busy intersection. It was like we had been lifted out of the van and just plopped in the middle of the intersection. Neither one of us felt it, as you usually or hopefully would if you'd fallen out of a moving vehicle. I don't remember much else from the experience. The drivers stopped the van and truck once they noticed, and we weren't in the back. But on the fucking floor, we were surrounded by people just staring at us in disbelief. If I had not been told this story multiple times by different people, I wouldn't believe the story either. But it did happen, and I can't really explain either one of those stories away. I lived in a flat built on a mass grave. I experienced quite a lot of paranormal activities in my life, but there's this one encounter that when I think of it, I get goosebumps. I was a kid, maybe 9 years old, and I was spending time in my room playing video games on the computer. I was very focused. The desk with the computer was on the wall, and behind me was a bed and a closet, and a hole between the end of the bed and the wall. In that hole, I kept my toys and a big mess of other things. Among these things I kept there, a feather duster. It was very big and quite heavy, based off thick metal stick. So I was playing the game with this feather duster, and it flew above my head from one corner of my room to the other, bypassing my head maybe by 15 centimeters. I froze because it almost hit me, but at first I thought it was my mom, and I loudly said, "Mom, you almost hit me." And I turned around and there was no one here. I quickly stand up and run to my mother to ask her if she was in my room. She denied and asked what happened. What do you think about it? I have many stories from this flat. We believe that the block was built on a mass grave. I mean, there was a lot of battles and killed people in this area during World War II that never got to have their own graves. In fact, their bodies never got to be found or recognized for them to be put in a cemetery. And as the world was rebuilding after World War II, destruction and their bodies just kind of resorptioned. Later, we even got a priest to cleanse this flat from bad souls, and we also heard a lot of unexplainable stories from our neighbors. So it wasn't only our flat. Ask Reddit. This happened a year ago. It was me and 4 other coworkers, and we just got finished with a 16-hour shift. Headed home from the Shasta Trinity Forest area of Northern California at around 3 a.m. Now, if you've never been in that area, you'd know that it could easily be an area for an inbred cult of cannibals to call home. There's absolutely no civilization in at least a 2,000 square mile range. So we're driving through the mountains on these crazy, creepy back roads. Tired as fuck, and while the area is beautiful during the day, it's spooky as fuck at night, so we're already feeling uneasy. As we're driving, some big fucking dude in a jumpsuit comes stumbling onto the road holding some kind of dirty stuffed animal and just looks right into our headlights. Again, this is hours away from anything. We just swerved around him, but my heart was racing the rest of the night. We were discussing whether or not that we should call someone, but decided not to. It looked like some kind of setup or a trap. Afterwards, no one wanted to even talk about it at all. No one ever brought it up again for the remainder of my time working with those guys. I'd mentioned it, and they'd pretend I was crazy or something. Fucking weird, man. I thought it was fake, but here I am on Reddit. A couple of months ago, me and my dad, my stepmom, went to Ioannina, specifically on the island in the middle of the lake, in Greece, where I lived at the time. Correct me if I'm saying that wrong. There I bought a cool-looking yet cheap dagger. It's not sharp, I just bought it to look cool on my desk. When I went back home the very same day, my friend who's into witchcraft and all those other such things told me that I could use it for spells and stuff. So without believing in these things at the time, I tried a ritual in which you talk with spirits. It's basically like a Ouija board, but with a lit candle and some thread. I won't go into detail about how the ritual is done, but you basically just talk with spirits. I didn't believe it would work at the time, so I messed around and did everything my friend told me not to do. That was definitely not a good idea, though. Because apparently, it's all real. Ghosts, or rather spirits, beings beyond our senses and comprehension, and even demons. I know unknown beings are real ever since other paranormal experiences, but I've posted about that before. But I was not expecting ghosts and demons to exist as well. Anyhow, after I messed around with the ritual, I had angered the spirit that I'd communicated with. When I asked it questions, it told me it was a 42-year-old man from the UK named Geoff, who died in an accident at the supermarket. After I finished talking to him, I unknowingly ended the ritual incorrectly, and then I headed to bed. As I was trying to sleep, though, Geoff showed me some concerning signs. As I was in bed, I could hear footsteps in the room with me, but when I looked around, there was no one there. When I finally fell asleep, came the worst part. Geoff haunted my dreams. I saw that I was in a family gathering at my grandmother's house, where I lived at the time this whole thing happened. In the dream, I recognized everyone there except one guy. He appeared to be a cousin of mine, with which I'd gotten along pretty well. His name was Jason. As I was playing around with him, I decided to mess with him a little. He was pushing me through the hallway, and I thought it would be funny to suddenly let go and let him fall. But he fell kind of diagonally and hit his head on the kitchen door frame, dying in the process. To say the least, this dream left me unable to forget it. Anyway, I was so scared that I ran away out of the house. I ran across the road and turned randomly when suddenly I realized I was outside my old house, where I once lived with my parents. I took out my keys and looked at them, and in the dream I still had the keys to the place. It's an apartment building, so there were 2 keys. I opened the door to the building and then entered the elevator. There were originally 4 floors, so there were 5 buttons on the aged elevator, including the ground floor. But in my dream, there was a 6th button with no number beside it, between floor 3 and 4. Out of curiosity, I pressed it and waited for the elevator to stop. After I got out, everything got a bit darker, as if I lowered the brightness in a video game. The floor itself was almost identical to the 2nd floor of the building down to the smallest details. Except there were strange pieces of wood as decoration on little shelves in the building hallway. I grabbed one for some reason and went upstairs, expecting to see the 3rd or 4th floor, hoping for the darkness to disappear. Since this was some kind of weird version of the 2nd, I saw the 3rd floor, but the darkness was still there. I put my key in the apartment front door and opened it. When I walked inside, it was completely identical to the real apartment when I lived there. Besides the place itself and the darkness, there were small dark entities floating around, like little black ghosts. They had faces too, but it was as if they were made of smoke. When I swung the stick I took earlier at one of them, its face got all distorted like a bunch of smoke when you swing at it. After that, I took a short pause to evaluate the situation and realized that all the little ghosts were singing. Every entity was singing a different melody, but they all had the same voice. The creepy female text-to-speech, almost whispering, like the ones in the old analog horror videos. After that, I curled up scared in the corner of the living room between the couch and the TV. After a few seconds of fear, I woke up at 5 a.m. to a brief image of a very scary face staring at me, and then reality. Believe me, I know this sounds casual, but ever since that incident, I believe in both witchcraft and spirits. Never messing with this kind of stuff again. Do you think all hospitals are haunted? Probably the one that I worked at was. When I saw the ghost of a patient and wasn't going to back off. I was told by the supervisor of nurses not to mention it to anyone who wasn't working with me that night. Then there was the fire in the trash can. Nobody was in the bathroom when it started. We nurses had our own smoking area. And the patients had their own as well. We had to evacuate the whole wing, 7 floors, and guess which floor I worked on? You probably got it. 7. Then there was the witch. She was blind, long gray hair. Her eyes were a cloudy green. This all happened on the 3rd shift over a 4-year period. Every nurse on the floor was afraid of her. She rang her buzzer one night. There were 8 of us nurses on the floor. I was elected to attend to her. One of the other girls went with me. When we got to her, she said to me, "You're not afraid of me, are you?" I told her, no, I wasn't. She then said that the fire department's on the way. I asked her why would she say that. She then informed me that she could see them. I told her that they weren't coming because there's no fire. She told me again she could see them. About 3 to 4 minutes later, fire engines, about 6 of them. I have to admit she creeped me out a little bit and there was no fire. A silent alarm went off, mysteriously. I went back in to talk to her about how she knew. She told me that she was born with a veil over her eyes. If you're familiar with this condition, you know anyone born like this can see things other people can't. My great-grandma was born with it, but she wasn't blind. The lady told me that there were people who died in the hospital but weren't at rest. While she was there, I and my friend went in and talked to her every night. She was a very interesting lady. We then started finding out nurses and doctors on the other floors also would occasionally see people who weren't supposed to be there. But we couldn't talk about it. So yeah, some of them probably are. Nursing home haunts. I work in a nursing home that's also attached to a hospital. Lately, there had been a lot of death in the nursing home, and it's so weird, like it comes in waves. They say death usually comes in threes, which I've found to be true. Sometimes it comes in clusters of threes. Like we'll have a group of 3 die within 1 to 2 weeks. A few weeks later, another set of 3. Then go a while without anyone dying. If you've read any of my posts before, you'll know that I have a lot of stories about patients and residents seeing children. As of the past month or two, I have a lot of new stories, and I'm not sure why things have been so active all of a sudden. When I was still working night shift, we were doing 2 a.m. rounds, and my fellow coworker froze in her tracks in the hallway, turned completely white. She suddenly looked sick. I asked her what was wrong, and she said that she saw a full-body apparition of a little boy. The little boy looked at her, and then he walked into the wall between 2 residents' rooms. Within a week, both residents died. Another thing that happened was this lady rang her call light. No big deal. We go to answer it. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning. The resident asked us why there were children buried in the backyard. Down the hall, they had adjacent to her, another resident was banging her head in the wall at the same time talking about children. She died shortly after. This one really creeped me out big time. But we had a resident ring, and yet again we go to answer. She tells us that we needed to see the lady across the hall because she's dead. We didn't believe her and thought she was crazy, but we went to check on the resident, and sure as shit, she was dead. Another story. The nurse's station at the nursing home has very high counters. So when someone walks by when you're sitting, you can only see the top of their head. We were sitting there in the middle of the night, and we see the top of what we assumed to be a woman's head. She had short, curly black hair, and she was walking very fast with a purpose down the hall. Come to find out, around the same time on a different unit, another resident who fit that description passed away. My experience with the Grim Reaper. This came to me in the form of a dream, but I'm not sure what to make of it. This happened a couple years ago, but it still haunts me, and I never told anyone about it. One night I had a dream. I was in the bathroom, a bathroom I did not recognize. I was just standing there looking at myself in the mirror. A ghost came out of the wall and said, "Come with me." I followed the ghost, and it led me out the front door, and what I saw was myself and the Grim Reaper sitting on a bench, surrounded by a foggy mist. The Grim Reaper and I stared at each other for what felt like forever, but he did not have a face. He had his hood up, of course, but where his face should have been was nothing but complete darkness. It was darker than darkness, I could say. He then turned his head away from me and looked straight ahead. He slowly lifted his arm and pointed straight in front of us. I looked in the direction he was pointing. Then my dream ended. The worst part of it all is within a year after having that dream, at least a dozen people I know passed away. My grandfather died unexpectedly within a month. My aunt passed shortly after. My 13-year-old cousin passed away when he was hit by a hit-and-run driver. My 30-year-old cousin died of a heart attack, and her mom died a week later. 2 members of my boyfriend's family died. My son's father lost both of his grandmothers. My grandmother lost 2 siblings. My stepfather lost a cousin and 2 family friends. My boyfriend also lost a friend. It was crazy, so much death, and that was all in a year. I had that dream in January. The little girl that took my hand and led me into the woods to show me where she laid down and died. This is a story about my mom's house. Her and my stepfather, we'll call him P, have been married for almost 15 years. I'm going to call him Peter. Peter is the 5th generation of his family to live on this inherited 150-acre property in a small rural town. He inherited a farmhouse that was so old it was deemed unlivable, so they tore it down, buried most of it, and put a modular home on the property. Before Peter married my mom, he lived in an old farmhouse with an ex-wife that we'll call B. I'm going to call her Brenda. Brenda thought the property and the house was extremely haunted, and Peter didn't disagree. They decided to bring a psychic in to do an investigation, and she said that there were very many spirits, but that they were all good. Shortly after, at around 3 a.m., Peter's awakened by a light turning on outside his bedroom window. Living in the middle of nowhere, there was no reason for a light to turn on like that. He looked out the window and saw a little girl standing there. Brenda woke up and looked out the window and saw her too. But then they smelled smoke. They went downstairs to see if their kitchen had caught on fire. Everything in that kitchen burned except for these Christmas wax figures of Mary, Jesus, and Joseph. Peter still has them in a shadow box placed in the kitchen that he has now. They're lucky they didn't lose the whole house. Fast forward to a long time later. My mom and Peter get married and are living happily ever after, and I'm living underneath the same roof of my early teen years. I loved living there. There was so much property to explore, but I remember this one part in the woods gave me the heebie-jeebies. It made me feel so overwhelmingly uncomfortable with so many bad vibes. One night I fell asleep, and I remember having a really weird dream. In my dream, it was very early in the morning, the crack of dawn. I get up and I go out my back door, and I remember the sky being a dark bluish gray, and the air felt refreshingly cool on my skin. A little girl who couldn't be any older than 7 walks all from the woods up to the yard and onto the back deck. She has very pale skin, light blonde hair, and light-colored clothing. She looks at me and smiles. I think to myself about how sweet, warm, and friendly she was. She doesn't say anything, but she holds her hand out and gestures to me to come with her, so I take her hand. We walk and walk for what feels like an eternity. Along the way, we pass many ghosts, but they aren't bothering anybody, and they're just there observing. The little girl led me to a spot in the woods that had always made me uncomfortable. Suddenly, the weather turns from summer to winter, from morning to evening. It was freezing. I'm amazed by how beautiful the scenery is, but I then realized the little girl wasn't holding my hand anymore. I look around and I see her body laying dull, limp, lifeless in a shallow creek. Her skin had turned blue and she was curled up like a ball. I had screamed and cried for help at the top of my lungs, but nobody heard me and nobody came. I then woke up. The dream really bothered me, and it freaked my parents out very bad. I decided that I needed to do research and found that about 50 years prior, a young girl 1.5 miles down the road disappeared, but nobody knew where she went. I asked Peter since he lived on this road his entire life, and he confirmed it. man appeared out of nowhere to help me when I got stranded. There was a day I finally had off work, and I decided I'd head to the beach. The closest beach is about an hour and a half away, and I decided to book it down and try to get there on time to see the sunrise on my own. Just a bit of background. I wasn't in a very good mindset back then. I always truly felt alone, kind of lost and hopeless in my life. I really felt there was no purpose in living, really. I'm a person that likes to run away from my problems and tries to find things to keep me distracted and constantly busy. That's why I work a lot and don't have many days off. I dreaded having a day off and being alone with my thoughts, and figured I'd just get away from where I was even a little bit. I was only going to be a half-day trip where I'd go see the sunrise, take in my surroundings, meditate, and find some inner peace before going back to my mediocre life. I ended up getting there once the sun rose, which was a bummer, but it wasn't going to stop me from enjoying watching the waves. The location I went to is technically an island, but there's a massive bridge that you can use to drive over there. Once you get on the island, it's basically the shape of a long strip, and it goes for miles if you drive north of it. So I decided to drive a good 8 to 10 miles out by car, where I knew there would be no people, and I can just be alone. Some people drive down that way more to go deep-sea fishing, but while driving I didn't see any cars. Once I got to an access point on the beach, I made a really dumb move and decided to drive into the sand. I have a Kia Optima, so in no way is my car capable of driving through sand. No way. Don't ask me why. I was kind of in a fuck it, what could go wrong moment, and within 5 feet of getting into the access point, my car got stuck. No signal since I was way out there. No people, just me and my sunken car. Surprisingly, my mentality was just, well, I've been through a lot in my life, and it's been way worse, and I felt way worse, so this isn't so bad. I calmly went and checked what I was dealing with, and yeah, car was mega stuck in the sand. I shrugged, rolled up my sleeves, and started to dig in attempts to get the tires out of the soft sand. I figured I could do that for some time before I get tired, and if it didn't work, I'd just leave my car there and go enjoy the day. Figure out things later. It was probably 7 a.m. at the time, so if I had to go do an 8 to 10 mile walk, then no biggie. Probably in about 5 minutes of me just digging, I all of a sudden hear a voice behind me that scared the jeebus out of me. I turned to see an older gentleman in fishing gear with a big 4x4 Ford truck, standing a few feet away asking me if everything was okay. The most distinct feature on him was his shirt had his name embroidered on it with an M. Zuniga. He was probably in his 60s, white hair, and I could tell by the tips that it stuck out from under his beige cap. Round glasses and a bit tanned. He looked like a normal old guy to me, ready to go fishing. It was strange, though. I didn't hear his car or even notice him getting out and walking up to me, and I was the only person there. There wasn't much at all really any background noise since I wasn't remotely close to the ocean, so it would have been hard to miss him coming up. He asked me again if I was okay. I said, yeah, perfectly fine for the most part. You're crazy to try to drive this car in there. It wouldn't have made it, he told me. I kind of laughed and told him, yeah, it was a pretty dumb move on my part. He started inspecting my car and told me that he can use his truck to pull me out. I obliged. After a few minutes of tangling around some wires and maneuvering my car, my baby was out. I thanked him again for the generosity. What's your name? He asked me. I let him know, and he said it was nice to meet me. He looks around a bit, kind of peering into my car. And what are you doing out here all alone? I told him I had a day off work and I just wanted to enjoy the day. He stares at me for a few moments, then introduces himself. My name is Mario Zuniga. Where are you from? I tell him the city I came from and his eyes lit up. Oh, I'm from there too. I have a clinic in that city. I'm a veterinarian. After some small talk, I mentioned where I worked, and he knew exactly where I was talking about. "Oh yeah? The one off there." He seemed to be very familiar with the city. After all, he did say he lived there. After a bit more of talking, he stuck out his hand and I shook it. He clasped my hand with his other hand and just held it, and he told me, "I really hope you're doing okay. I like to look out for people. I just want to see how you're doing. I'm actually going fishing, but I'm heading out for a couple miles from here. I'll probably be out all day. I'd love to invite you, but I don't know when you'll have to leave." I told him I appreciate the offer, but it was okay. I wasn't planning on staying long. He told me that if I wanted to hang out on the beach, it's probably best if I head south instead, where I can park in an actual parking lot and just walk my way up to the shore. I agreed. He wished me the best and reminded me that things will be okay, and went on his own way. I don't know if I gave off that solemn kind of energy and he felt it, or thought that I may have wanted to do something extreme while alone out there, but his last words of reminding me that things are going to be okay really stuck with me. I ended up going to the south side and hanging out on the beach there for a couple of hours. I decided to Google him, since he said that he was a vet in my hometown. The city I live in is relatively small, and I only know of 3 vet clinics in the area. I did a real extensive search of his name and looked up a majority of vets that worked in those clinics. Couldn't find an ounce of this man anywhere. It was really as if he didn't exist. Almost, because even if I then felt like he appeared out of thin air, and on top of that, I was the only person that saw him. Shadow being plays with me on some nights. I woke up, but still in my bed, and I was kind of between sleep and a lucid state. There are 2 pillows which I use to sleep in my bed, the left one and the right one. When I woke up, I was really close to the pillow, the left one, but I slept on the right one. My head was turned towards the left side. So I felt a strange sort of feeling, because I felt the same type of energy I feel when the shadow being comes. I also felt that this being was here again to play and have fun by himself. The being pressed and pushed my head onto the left pillow. It was really hard to resist, and to go against his own maneuver. Sorry, that's spelled wrong. Go against his own movement. Of course, I tried to push my head backwards, but quite difficult. In the same time, I felt my mouth was opening on its own. I was shocked and thought that maybe he wanted to go inside. I resisted with great difficulty, but I did it. After that, I remembered nothing. The second one that happened to me was this night. So I slept normally, but woke up at 1:30, an hour after falling asleep. I dreamt about a creature creating pictures with an AI night cafe, but in real life. It was odd and strange. I went to the toilet, and after coming back to my room, I fell asleep. Before going to sleep, I prayed for Jesus Christ to protect me, but after some time, here they are. They're coming again, and the prayer did not work. I woke up again, but I had to have my eyes closed, and I felt a pressure on my chest, like someone was sitting on me. I tried to breathe with difficulty, but after, somebody was doing pressure movements on my chest, like if someone is needing help for the heart. I opened my eyes and saw a black figure with feminine silhouette standing and watching in front of my bed. She was wearing a hat of the 50s and looked at me. With confusion at first, I thought it was just like my model figure, because I have one in my home and sometimes put the clothes that I made on it. But this was impossible because I don't have a hat like this, and I did not put my model figure in front of my bed. I then knew something was strange. It was probably the shadow figure. I closed my eyes and then felt my left arm going up without me controlling it. I tried to put it down, but again it went up, and again I put it down, and finally woke up. But when I opened my eyes, I saw that my arm was still next to me and was never pulled up. I then think, because it happened some other times, that in fact, we are waking up with our astral body and our physical body, so the entity can move our parts of our astral body because of that. Well, sir, that story was slightly confusing to me, and I thought it needed a not safe for work warning. But that's just the narrator. That's the end of today's stories. Have a great night, guys. See you tomorrow.